I'd like to start by admitting that I'm somewhat of a hermit. I live alone in the middle of nowhere. I don't own a cell phone, and I have exactly one real friend. As you can imagine, my life is pretty uneventful, or at least, it used to be. That changed when I started dating a beautiful woman named Moira. Looking back, the past few days since I met her have been unusual, to say the least. But who am I to say what's normal? So I'm writing it all down and leaving it here for you to decide. Am I overthinking things? Or does this all seem as strange to you as it does to me? Please let me know what you think in the comments. At the behest of Joshua, my best friend and social guide, I decided to set up an online dating profile. Having been out of the dating scene for an embarrassing amount of time, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Was I looking for something serious? Something casual? Just friends or something more intimate? I wasn't stoked about the idea at first, and it wasn't until I came across her profile that I knew what I was actually looking for, a reason to get out of the house, out of my comfort zone, and away from the everyday tedium that was my life. Her bio read, I'm outdoorsy, adventurous, and looking to have fun, hang out, and maybe grab a bite to eat. I'm not looking for anything serious, so don't expect me to catch feelings or stick around. No strings attached. The casual tone of her philosophy on dating gave me hope. Or maybe I just saw an opportunity. Every part of her bio seemed to speak directly to me. I wasn't outdoorsy or adventurous, but I was looking for a reason to be. I also wanted someone to hang out with and have fun with. Someone besides Joshua. No offense if you're reading this. The cherry on top was the mention of no strings attached. That meant that even if things inevitably turned into a disaster, I could retreat into my shell and no one would get hurt. She'd move on to the next guy and Joshua would finally get off my back. Besides her bio, her pictures were serene. Each one looked like a painting, with her as the focal point, and she looked absolutely stunning. She had long black hair and beautiful dark brown eyes. She was a little on the pale side, but who can resist the allure of a goth mommy? Or at least, that's what Joshua called her when I showed him the pictures. There was just one thing off about them. They were all taken in the woods, by the lakeside, or in front of a waterfall. She wasn't kidding about being outdoorsy. The only way I can describe her aesthetic is gothic cottagecore. And before you question how I know that, I just want to clarify that just because I'm a hermit doesn't mean I'm not chronically online. Joshua was a little cynical when I suggested her as my first choice. She's a little out of your league, don't you think? He said with uncertainty. I could tell he was trying to be nice and let me down easy. I still went for it. I messaged her and then immediately felt silly for even trying. Joshua's comment still echoing in the front of my mind. The echo was quickly pushed to the back of my thoughts, drowned out by the sound of a notification. It was her. She replied instantly. After an hour of talking, I was already dressed and out the door, ready for our first date. I stopped on my way to the car, having completely forgotten to ask her where we were going. All I remembered her saying was that she wanted to go someplace to eat. I ran back to my computer and quickly looked for nearby places. After some frantic searching, I found a diner outside of town. It had one glowing 5-star review, and in my rush, I accepted it at face value. I went to the location she gave me, expecting to pick her up at her house. But instead, she was just kind of standing on the side of the road, with no side roads leading up to where she stood. If I hadn't been expecting her to be there, it would have felt like one of those ghost stories. The ones where hitchhikers appear in your backseat after you pass them by. But she didn't look scary at all. She looked even more beautiful than her pictures, almost glowing. The air around her smelled sweeter, and the sunlight seemed to shine just for her, like a spotlight. Though, that could have been the scent of the flowers around her, or the way the sun reflected off her white dress. I leaned over, opened the passenger door, and gestured for her to get in. The uneasy silence stretched the 10-minute drive into what felt like an hour. The road was as rough as you'd expect on the outskirts of a small town, and my car's worn-out suspension didn't help. Needless to say, we were off to a bumpy start. The actual date went just as poorly. It didn't take long for me to realize I had picked the wrong place. To say the place was run down would be an understatement. There were unidentifiable stains on every table, and one persistent group of flies circled them. I think even the flies were too scared to land anywhere. The owner introduced himself, and I remember thinking his name sounded familiar. Normally a native You can chalk that up to being a small town thing. And I knew almost nobody from town, except for a handful of people I graduated high school with. And this guy clearly wasn't in the class of 2018. He was more or less my grandmother's age. We took a seat as far away from the bathroom as possible. You don't want to know what the place smelled like. Strangely enough, she didn't seem to mind the smell or the surroundings. Maybe she was just putting on a brave face, because I was the only one who ordered something. I felt bad for taking her out to eat, and then choosing the one place no girl would ever want to eat at. She assured me she wasn't hungry, and even when I insisted I was paying, she just smiled and slid the menu over to my side of the table. "Pick your poison," she said with a smirk. Reluctantly, I ordered a cheeseburger with fries. And for drinks, I went with 2 bottles of water. I was just relieved to be drinking something that didn't come from whatever machine had produced those stains. The food arrived quickly. I still felt guilty about being the only one eating, so I offered her some fries and half my burger, but she politely declined. I didn't think much of it until, a couple of bites into my burger, I had to use the bathroom. I jokingly asked, "Would you mind keeping the flies off my food while I'm gone?" She agreed with a playful smile. "Of course. Take your time," she said, a little too eagerly. The diner was cramped, and the bathroom was barely separated from the seating area by a half wall that desperately tried, but failed, to quarantine the stench. As I washed my hands, I had a clear view of our table. I could see her eating from my plate. At first, I thought it was cute. I thought she was just too shy to eat in front of me. But then I noticed how quickly and erratically she was grabbing the food. She must have been starving. But when I returned, my food seemed untouched. Not even a single fry was out of place. I could have sworn I saw her eating. At least she did a great job fending off the flies. There wasn't a single one in sight when I came back. Our second day was lovely compared to the first. The fresh air and beautiful scenery were a stark contrast to the stomach-churning experience at the so-called 5-star diner. Technically, the 2 dates could be considered one-long dates since the second followed immediately after the first, but I'll refer to it as the second date just to wash off the sting from the first one. When we left the diner, my head hung low with embarrassment. "Do you want me to drop you off at home?" I asked, searching for my car keys. Moira's face fell, a look of surprise and sadness washing over her. "I think I even saw a tear. Or I can just drop you where I found you," I added quickly, trying to recover. This date couldn't have gone worse, I thought to myself while scrambling to console her. She put her arms around me, and just like that, the tears stopped. "Does it have to be over?" she whimpered. Now I was surprised. I'd thought I had blown my one chance. And here she was, giving me another shot. Looking back now, it seems more like she was the one pleading for another chance. Could this really be the same woman whose bio explicitly stated she wasn't looking to catch feelings? It only seems strange now, in hindsight, but at the time, all I could do was say whatever would keep the sweet woman in front of me from crying. And no, of course not. "What did you have in mind?" She paused. Then, as if flipping a switch, her voice suddenly became calm and composed. "Have you ever gone hiking?" "Hiking? Are you serious?" I said with a chuckle. She frowned, not seeing the irony. Before I even messaged Moira that day, I had been talking to Joshua about first date ideas. Hiking was my first and only suggestion. I knew from her bio she'd love it. But Joshua wasn't convinced. "You can't go hiking on a first date. That's ridiculous." Joshua coughed. "How can you expect a girl you don't even know to meet you in the middle of the woods? Not to mention, it's dangerous. I've been hiking before. My backyard is practically part of a hiking trail," I argued, trying to convince both him and myself that I was up for the task. "No way. Nobody wants to get all sweaty and exhausted climbing a mountain on a first date," he said firmly, shutting down the idea. I wish I'd listened. But standing there in front of Moira, asking so little of me, how could I refuse? Besides, this wasn't our first date anymore, so Joshua's point didn't matter. I should have known the trail she had in mind started right where I picked her up, hidden in the underbrush and barely visible unless you knew where to look. I had to crouch down to squeeze through the narrow gap in the bushes. The earth beneath me was damp and cool, and the air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and rich soil. This was all so new to me. As soon as I emerged, the contrast was striking. My car, only a few meters away, was nearly invisible, swallowed by dense trees and undergrowth. The road was a distant hum, barely audible, as if belonging to another world. The forest enveloped me, its silence heavy, and the few sounds I could hear felt like a soft lullaby. This wasn't just a hike. It felt like stepping into another realm, a place that had always been here, just outside my home, waiting. Too bad it will be a long time before I can go hiking again. We followed a barely visible footpath for about 15 minutes, making awkward small talk. She was even shyer than I was, and I already liked her enough to want to break through her tough exterior, despite what her bio had said. Eventually, we reached a proper trail, much more defined than the one we'd been following. Staring at the path ahead, it seemed we had two choices, left or right. On the other side, a steep cliffside loomed. Too steep for me, but seemingly made for mountain goats and creatures far nimbler than I was. Already a bit winded, I looked at Moira, trying to hide how out of shape I was. Left or right? I asked, exhaling quickly. She smirked and, without a word, grabbed a tree branch and started climbing. With no hesitation, she scaled the cliff with practiced ease. Like an expert climber, I could only watch in amazement. Are you coming? She called from the top. I don't know. Seems kinda unsafe. Maybe there's another way up? I scanned the area for an easier route. Nope. This is the only way up. Come on. It's my favorite path. The view at the top will take your breath away. She eased, her tone playful, almost like a challenge. I hesitated, staring up at the cliff face. It didn't look too bad, but I could already feel the tension in my arms. I grabbed the first handhold, feeling the rough rock beneath my fingers. I was moving slowly and I almost made it to the top. But when I tried to steady myself and take a breath, my foot slipped on loose gravel. My heart raced as I fumbled for a grip. Just as I thought I was going to fall, a hand shot down and grabbed mine. Moira's grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers wrapping around mine with reassuring force. With a firm tug, she pulled me up. I scrambled to catch my breath, adrenaline still pulsing through me. Thanks, I muttered, trying to hide how shaken I felt. Moira was one strong lady. She probably could have dragged me up there herself if I'd refused. I looked back at the path we came from, barely 5 meters above where I started. The same trees I had walked under now stretched below me. That's it? This view is supposed to take my breath away? I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. No, silly. That's further up. She smiled, flicking her hair playfully before continuing her ascent. I remember thinking, how much further is this going to escalate? I was already worried about how I'd get back down, let alone going higher. Thankfully, the rest of the climb was relatively smooth. After about 30 minutes of carefully navigating a wind and uneven trail, I pushed through the final stretch of dense underbrush. The path didn't look man-made. It seemed more like something massive had carved through the forest, leaving a jagged trail in its wake. The bushes and trees on either side were thick, but what stood out the most was the smell. It was as if I were surrounded by a minefield of dead animals. Yet I couldn't see a single carcass. The only thing that seemed out of place were the trees. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, no different from the ones lower on the mountain. But these were scattered with odd, bulbous growths, and the branches hung white, waxy shapes that reminded me of overripe fruit. But there was something wrong with them. Their shape resembled pinnacones, but their surfaces were smooth and glistening in the light. The sizes varied wildly, some as large as prized pumpkins, others small and shriveled like withered pears. Still, I pushed on, just hoping the trail leads somewhere. As we got closer, the sound grew louder. It started as a deep, crumbling roar, almost mechanical, like the earth beneath me was groaning. As I got closer, it sounded like water over rocks, but heavier. The noise vibrated through my chest, a low hum that stirred the dead air around me. My steps slowed as the static noise gnawed at the back of my mind. As I pushed past the last few branches, we finally broke through into an clearing. I almost walked right into Moira. She was standing there with her back to me, the only thing between me and the source of the noise. She turned around, her white dress from earlier now caked in dirt, bits of plants clinging to her almost as desperately as I had when she pulled me up. She looked at me curiously. You know, there's something different about you, she said with a curious smirk. Her words caught me off guard. It was the first thing either of us had said since I first heard the distant rumbling. Most guys would be full of questions by now. Are we there yet? What's that smell? What's that noise? How much further? Blah. 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 But you seem oddly content just following along. Wherever the wind takes you. Like a blank canvas. Or a lump of clay. She smiled. I admire that about you. I opened my mouth to respond. But before I could say anything, she began unbuttoning her dress. The shock flustered me. My breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted away from her, finally taking in my surroundings. We were on top of a much higher cliff. I stepped forward, feeling icy water seep into my shoes. We were standing at the edge of a waterfall. I found the rather mundane source of the otherworldly noise. But the sight before me was unlike anything I'd ever seen. However, my mind was elsewhere, on the woman in front of me, now in her underwear. She was right about taking my breath away. Her skin was impossibly smooth, flawless in a way that seemed unnatural for someone who climbed rugged rocks and broken branches all day. Flawless except for one spot. Too faded to be a tattoo. It resembled butterfly wings. It rested in the middle of her stomach, and it was tilted at a 90-degree angle, like an artist had started drawing something delicate but left it unfinished. For a fleeting moments, I almost likened it to a tramp stamp. But that didn't sit right. There was nothing crude about it. It was something else. Subtle and elegant. Perhaps a birthmark? Beautiful, isn't it? Why, yes. I stuttered, unsure if she was talking about herself for the view. Would you join me for a swim? She asked enticingly. I don't know. The water up here seems a little shallow. I gestured at my soaked shoe. Plus, the current is a little too strong. I didn't mean up here, she said with the same challenging smirk as earlier. I stared at her blankly, feeling the blood drain from my face, down to my legs, and into the icy water. Her implication was clear, almost demanding. I had already given up my right to say no to sex, and we left the diner. She knew she had me wrapped around her surprisingly strong finger. I couldn't back down now. Even my logical side knew this was my best option, to jump into the white noise at the bottom of the waterfall and pray the water wasn't deceiving me, that it really was as bottomless as it had seemed. The only alternative was to climb down. Alone. It's not that bad. The water will catch you. Almost like a safety net, she said reassuringly. If someone asked you to jump off a cliff, would you do it? The answer is yes. If that someone was Moira. We had only just met, but I wanted her to take me everywhere she'd ever been. And if she was going down that waterfall, so was I. But not out of obedience. I was doing it for me. So Moira, if you're reading this, don't feel bad about what happened. It wasn't your fault. I had been following her every move. But even before I met her, I was already living life on autopilot, never taking risks. Going out with Moira today was supposed to be my first step toward changing that. So, what's one more step? Even if it's off a cliff. I anxiously unrest, slipping off my waterlogged shoes and watching as the current took them over the edge. One pair of shoes was a small price to pay for a new life. I looked at Moira with all the steely determination of a man standing in his underwear. I inhaled as deep as I could, my chest swelling with newfound confidence. Stand back, lady. I'll go first, this said in a voice befitting a hero. I rushed toward the edge, sharp rocks digging into my bare feet, trying to stop me before I did something foolish. But they only turned my triumphant dash into more of a brisk waddle. Then I saw it, sticking out of the water right on the edge, and unassuming. Smooth, mound rock, a tiny island in a sea of needles. So soft, inviting, flawless. It reminded me of Moira. I leapt onto the rock, placing all my faith in one foot. It failed me. It wasn't until I was already in the air that I realized my mistake. I slipped on the rock that once looked so innocent. Now it was biting into the back of my neck. The rest is only flashes and sounds. A loud thud. A soft crack. A bright sky, swallowed by immediate darkness. Moira's scream was drowned out by the sound of rushing water, and the last thing I saw was the surface of the water spiraling closer as I made my descent. What exactly happened after I hit the water? That's something I'm still trying to figure out. It's important to note that I am writing this more than a week after my accident. but the memories are still surprisingly fresh. It took me a while to get this part written down, and I should have the next part posted within a week. But for now, my doctor is urging me to get some rest. I woke up in darkness, unsure where I was. My body felt stiff, my chest tightening with each breath, like something was constricting me. A coarse blanket weighed over me, suffocating in its own way. Even my arms felt heavy, pinned down by strings anchored into my veins. I was wrapped in a cocoon I couldn't escape. My neck was squeezed too tightly to take in enough air, and my breaths came in shallow bursts. I was a fly caught in a web. One by one, my senses returned. A soft hum of machines filled the silence, the sharp scent of antiseptic cutting through the haze. The room swam in and out of focus. It wasn't a web. It was a hospital bed. But even as the confusion faded, the feeling of being trapped didn't. I tried to move, but a sudden pain flared through my neck, a brace holding me still. I laid there awake for hours, hopeless. It wasn't until one of the nurses carefully turned me over to my side that I saw the bundle of flowers next to a bottle of whiskey. It was the same flowers from where I first picked up Moira. I knew it was from her. I don't recall much of our small talk leading up to the cliff, but I remember mentioning I was a whiskey guy. The faint memory gave me hope. I knew she was the one who had saved me from a watery grave. The only person who visited me was Joshua. I expected a friendly greeting, but all I got was an earful about how reckless I'd been. After an IOF, I told you so. He finally relented and asked about the rest of the date. I told him everything I could remember. To me, the events had happened only a few hours ago, but apparently, I'd been in the hospital for a week before even waking up. And on top of that, another 3 days had passed before I was able to write anything down. Sorry you guys got the watered-down version of the events in part 1. The realization didn't hit me in the way you would think. I wasn't concerned about the time I lost. The only thought on my mind was if she still remembered me, if she still cared enough to see me again. In my current predicament, strung up in a hospital bed, I thought my chances with Moira were over. Desperate for any sort of way to communicate with her, I begged Joshua to bring my laptop to the hospital. He reluctantly agreed, but not before imparting more of his wisdom. I was growing sick of it. He paced up and down the hospital room, waving his hands like a preacher delivering a sermon. I don't like this. Look at you. Look at where this Moira girl got you. You should be happy you're alive. Man, if you keep pushing, I don't know how much more you can take. If you want my advice, just cut ties with her. And I cut him off before he could finish. You don't even know her. How could you blame her for this? How can you point fingers when it was your advice that led to all of this? I spoke harshly, aware of how defensive I was being. My words felt strange. Arguing with Joshua was something I'd never done before. We had never even disagreed on anything. This was the first time I pushed back instead of just going along with what he suggested. His calm response caught me off guard. I do know her. His voice didn't sound convinced of the words it carried. We briefly met at the hospital after your accident. We exchanged numbers. She asked me to let her know when you woke up. He hesitated, his uncertainty deepening. There was something off about her. Then, her eyes. They were colder and more aged than in her pictures. Did you let her know? I asked eagerly. His tone softened, shifting from ignorance to compassion. This was the Joshua I knew. Not yet. I'll let her know tonight, and I'll bring you your laptop tomorrow. I can see this is important to you. I'm sorry you think this is my fault. With a slight grin, he continued. But hey, at least you're out of the house. His twisted sense of humor almost made me chuckle. If only the pain would allow it. The next day couldn't come fast enough. The hope of seeing Moira again was all I could think about. In a misguided attempt to make the night pass quicker, I asked the nurses for more sedatives. I'm not sure what they gave me, but the effects were immediate. It was like I was pulled into a deep sleep, one I'd never known before. If only they'd warned me about the side effects. That night, I had a nightmare brought on by whatever the nurses gave me. I was still trapped in the hospital in the same room. But now, everything was shrouded in darkness. I awoke even slower than before, my senses muffled and distant. But I knew there was someone in the room with me. An old woman. I couldn't quite place her at first. The figure was small and frail, her presence oddly familiar, yet foreign. I thought it might be my grandmother, but then I remembered she died years ago. The woman knew I was awake and stood up from her chair. She quietly walked over to me and placed her hand on my face. It was cold, but as it pressed against my face, I felt a strange warmth, as if the touch was meant to comfort me. She leaned in closer, her breath cold against my ear. Then, in a voice soft yet chilling, she whispered, "Just point me to your pain, and I will do the rest. I'll clean you of this mess. In trade, I will request the recesses of your mind, of which I'll weave my nest." The words were cold and ominous, their implications comforting at first, and at the same time, terrifying, yet they were spoken as kindly as a lullaby, guiding me back to sleep. My laptop arrived the next morning, and with it the painful acceptance that my body was still too weak to make use of it. My message to Moira would have to wait. I spent the next 2 days trapped in my own thoughts, barely able to move. On the third day of waiting for Moira to visit, I finally caved. Ignoring the doctor's advice, I convinced a nurse to help me set up my laptop. I needed to write her something just to show I was alive. Once I booted up my laptop, I was met with the last page I had visited before our date. The nurse looked at me funny as I tried to suppress my laughter. There, in bold letters, right above 5 glowing stars, I realized why the diner owner's name sounded familiar. Not wanting to dwell on our first date any longer, I closed the page and opened Moira messages. No new messages. In fact, it looks like Moira hadn't been online for the past week. My heart sank knowing she hadn't written me. But at least she wasn't online looking for someone else. I sent her a pretty desperate and way too long message that she hasn't replied to yet, so I won't repeat it here, for my own sake and for whoever ends up reading this. With nothing else to do between physical therapy and doctor's visits, I decided to write down my experience so far, mostly as a mental exercise to try and remember what happened, and to serve as a warning to myself and anyone else planning to go hiking on their first date. Since I woke up, it took me almost another week of writing. I'm finally all caught up. I know that seems slow, but between piecing together my memories, and then painfully writing them down, I think I did okay, and just in time too. I'm finally getting released today. Joshua is picking me up in my car. He gave Moira my address so she could leave my car there. She didn't know what else to do with it after driving me to the hospital that day. The day I spent so long trying to recall. The next thing I write should be from the comfort of my own home. I should feel relieved, but I can't shake this strange, lingering feeling, like there's something I'm forgetting, but I can't quite place my finger on it. My first night back was worse than anything I've ever experienced. Not even the creepy old lady at the hospital can compare to what happened last night. Let me preface this by saying I don't usually have untyped before bed. But last night, I made an exception. When I got home and unpacked my things, I found the bouquet of dead flowers that served as a reminder of my relationship status with Moira. I put them into a vase of water, even though I fear it might be too late. With a sad sigh, I picked up the bottle of whiskey Moira had given me as a get-well-soon gift. I'd planned to keep it for sentimental value, but after these last 2 weeks, I figured I deserved a drink. Falling asleep was easy, even with the itchy neck brace. I don't know if it was the whiskey or the last few sleepless nights I spent in that rigid yet worn-out hospital bed, but I was exhausted, so tired that I even felt groggy during my dream, almost like the anesthetic the doctors gave me hadn't worn off yet. I guess it's my fault for mixing my pain medication with thinage. I should have known something was off the moment I got home, but exhaustion has a way of dulling your instincts. The dream started like any other. I was drifting in that strange state between falling asleep and clinging to consciousness. Of course, I know now that I must have been asleep and dreaming because there's no logical explanation for what happened next. The room was silent as any other night outside the city. My eyes were closed, and I could almost convince myself I was asleep. But then I heard it. It was faint but unmistakable. A heavy silence was broken up by what I can only describe as the sound of fingers cracking or ligaments popping into place. My eyes shot open. Something was moving, crawling onto the mattress. I couldn't see it, not fully. At this point, it was merely a suggestion of motion in my periphery. That's when I felt it. A slow, calculated weight shifting closer from the foot of my bed. I was begging every muscle in my body to allow me to sit up and turn on the light. Not a single one listened, and to my plea, the only thing I could move was my eyes. I looked down, as far down as my eyes would allow. I tried to lift my head, but if the paralysis wasn't enough to keep me anchored, the neck brace made sure of it. It was hopeless. I could feel the pressure building in my throat, making it almost impossible to breathe. The popping noise faded, replaced by the relentless pounding of my heartbeat, hammering against my eardrums as if desperate to escape. All the while, the silhouette was inching closer, the weight carefully shifting on the mattress. The shape was hovering over me, making sure not to touch me. My breathing was rapid and uncontrollable, and my heartbeat was growing louder, so I did the only thing I could in that situation. I used the only part of my body I still had control over, my eyes. I shut them with the same force I had opened them when I first heard that dreadful noise. The instant I closed my eyes, everything went quiet, all movement stopped, and my mattress was suddenly as stiff as the hospital bed I had grown accustomed to. It was all inside my head, I thought. It's just a bad dream. Keep your eyes closed and focus on falling asleep. This will all be over when you wake up. I laid there for what felt like hours, but realistically, it was just a few minutes. All I could do was wait for sleep or wait for my body to finally respond. I'm not a patient man, and I never have been, but after what I saw last night, I will never even complain about a red light ever again. I wish I had kept my eyes closed, but against my better judgment, I slowly opened them, my eyes adjusting to the darkness all too easily. Then I saw it, its face only a few centimeters from mine. The skin was smooth and pale, cracked like a porcelain doll, and stretched tightly over the ridges of its face. But it was the eyes that held me in place, a row of 8 black pearls that tapered out to the sides, the largest of which was a pair placed right in the middle, easily distinguishable by the glint of light collected in them, like pools of ink sucking up the last bit of light from the room. The time for screaming had long passed. All I could do was stare. I didn't even bother attempting to anymore. For all I knew, my paralysis had worn off, but I didn't care. Its gaze was unblinking, relentless, consuming. The darkness inside those eyes seemed to ripple, as though something moved just beneath. The sharp reflection of the room was mirrored in their glossy surfaces. The longer I stared, the more the room's reflection fell out of focus, and I could feel myself slipping further into pure darkness. I was falling down a well and unraveling like a poorly made basket, drifting into the void. The next thing I remember is waking up, expecting the usual soft morning light to seep through my paper-thin curtains, gradually brightening the room. Instead, the harsh midday sun spilled in unapologetically. Still, it was a welcome change from the unforgiving darkness of the previous night. I glanced at my alarm clock but couldn't see the time. Slowly, I turned my stiff body and clumsily reached over, knocking the half-empty whiskey bottle out of the way. It was almost 3 p.m. I'm still half asleep. I stumbled out of my room into the hallway. At first, I thought the old, stained wallpaper had little square patches of new wallpaper stuck over it. Then I noticed the wooden floorboards were scattered with broken glass and fallen picture frames. I didn't bother picking up all of them, but one caught my attention, and I took it out of the broken frame. I saw myself and my granddaughter standing in front of an old house in the woods. I was just a child. Beside us were 2 unfamiliar faces, a man and a woman, an aunt and uncle, family friends. My parents, why can't I remember what happened to them? Memories swam around in my head, but none pertained to my parents. I was starving by this point, so I figured I'd save time and make breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at once, which just meant pouring a comically large bowl of cereal. Now I'm sitting at my dining room table, spoon in one hand and the other on my keyboard, writing down what I remember from last night's dream. All the while I was thinking of the photograph next to my laptop, the old picture patiently resting on the polished surface of my grandmother's vintage table. I slid it closer, shifting my focus from the 2 strangers. I instead studied the background, a brand new tire swing hung from an old tree, and the house. I couldn't quite place it, but I knew I had been there as a kid. Strangely, recalling details from the picture felt harder than remembering a dream. On a different note, I once read something online about Chinese water torture. Don't ask me why I remember this, but not my childhood. Memories are strange like that. Anyway, it's a method where drops of water are slowly dripped onto a person's head at irregular intervals. The randomness of the dripping can lead to psychological effects, since the victim can't anticipate when the next drop will fall. Over time, this can lead to anxiety, stress, and even hallucinations. About halfway through writing this entry, I started feeling a faint, inconsistent dripping coming from the ceiling above me. I'd describe the source, but that would require me to get up, take almost 4 steps back, and painfully crane my head far enough back to even see the ceiling. It's too much effort for what I already know is just a leak. I've tried moving seats 3 times, but the dripping seems to follow me wherever I sit. Then it happened. After finishing my cereal and ensnared twirling my spoon, I swear I saw something. On the glossy surface of the spoon, a flash of movement caught my eye. A large shape skittering across the ceiling behind me. It moved like a shadow, but its color was a pale white. I saw it only for a second. It was swift and fleeting, but its form was unmistakable, a spider, bigger than a person. Its 8 legs pushing and pulling it out of the room in one smooth, coordinated motion. I almost jumped out of my skin. I spun around as fast as I could, whipping my head back. The pain was immense, shooting through me like lightning striking the back of my neck. In my frantic attempt to look at the ceiling, I found myself on my hands and knees, staring at the floor. Slowly, I pulled myself back onto the chair. I was lightheaded, on the verge of fainting. I jumped at every black spot in my vision. For a moment I just sat there, trying to make sense of what I had seen. It was then that I recalled reading about water torture and how it can cause hallucinations, which, oddly, gave me some comfort. At least now the dripping has stopped. I'll post all I have written so far for part 2. I can't bear to sit here and write another word. Not after what I just saw. I think I'll message Joshua to come over. I can't be alone right now. I'll keep you guys updated if anything else happens. Expect another part soon.